So I made some pictures of Willie McCovey for Willie Mays on the latter's 90th birthday. At least I know Mays is the greatest 49er of all time.
Yes, the lovely Nancy Pelosi messing up. A great publicity moment for her. And, of course, the great Willie Mays, who just turned 90 this week. And, of course, unlike bureaucrats, I'm hoping that I can give you all the real news here on Park Ridge Sports History. Hello, everyone. This is Will OToole welcoming you to another edition. And, of course, as the segment Cartoon presents, we're going to study the baseball career of Willie Mays from one aspect, the 1971 season, and all things about that 1971 season, because it really does jump out at me. Once again, I'd like to thank Howard Frederick for making this possible, and of course, all the people who tune in, and I do appreciate you watching. And I hope over the next 30 minutes, we can reintroduce all our great fans to the great Willie Mays, or introduce our young fans to the great Willie Mays. I don't think that's going to be a problem, because I think that Willie Mays is arguably a Mount Rushmore candidate along with Babe Ruth. And the reason why I put the two next to each other is because when I was a kid, I always felt that everyone knew who Ruth was and everyone who knew Mays. Now, I will tell you this. Here's a caveat. I was not a Yankee fan. I didn't hold Mantle in the same realm as many Yankee fans or American League fans do. But it was always seen, though, Mays, though, created, there was really no argument that it was always Mays who was, in every level, a better player over Mantle. And I know, and I'm being harsh on the Mantle fans, and I don't mean to be harsh on Mickey Mantle. Believe me, I think anyone would take his career. But I think too many people would say, okay, here's the loophole. Mantle got hurt so much, which allowed Mays to hit over 100 more home runs, have over 3,000 hits, etc. All well and good. It's a great argument. But I just think that if you take a look at the two players and objectively compare them, you'll see that Mays was really the better of the two. Maybe he didn't win as much. That's another argument for another day. Maybe he wasn't as iconic in the 50s and 60s that Mantle was. That's another argument for another day. But in terms of just pure baseball athleticism, pure baseball acumen, I think anybody would be hard-pressed to argue against the greatness of Mays as the greatest player, probably from the 1950s on. I know that Yogi has stated that the best player he ever saw was Joe DiMaggio. But remember, that's coming from an American leaguer. It's coming from a Yankee fan about a Yankee player about a Yankee teammate. I think deep down that if you were to poll, let's just say, 1 million baseball fans, I would say that 95% of them, and I'm going to leave those 5% out because we'll talk about that in a second. 95% of them would say that Mays is the greatest player in the second half of the 20th century. And why do I leave those 5% out? I'm actually saying those 5%, the majority of them are the baseball writers who didn't vote on the first ballot Willie Mays into the Hall of Fame. Don't give me this stuff about tradition. I think that there are such things that come along that just hit you right in the face that it's kind of obvious. And to keep Mays out because you are serving baseball tradition, that you don't give him 100%, and for that matter, Johnny Bench or Tom Seaver or Bob Gibson or Roberto Clemente, well, he was a special case. Those kind of guys that are basically immortals in the game, and you don't rank them with a full 100% induction into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot, there's something wrong there. And I've often felt that there are just certain guys that you can vote on, or it doesn't take a brain. You just have to put a check mark next to them. And that if you don't vote Willie Mays or Tom Seaver first ballot, man, I think your vote should be stripped from you because obviously you don't know the game. That's my little political thing there about Willie Mays. But you're telling me a guy who hit 660 home runs, who would be the most in National League history, and of course, only Babe Ruth at the time of his retirement was ahead of him. And by the way, this is a 1970 card. I saw the 1971 card. I'm going to show you the one I do like from 71. I don't like the Topps one from 71. This was the Kellogg's one that I was always wanting to get, along with Johnny Bench's, and never got a shot. These Kellogg ones. Now, this one, you would say it's a little frayed, folded at the ends. If you find these in mint condition, grab them while you can, because I know that they do go for a pretty good buy with collectors. Of course, I have the rookie card of George Foster, who was a teammate of Mantle in 1971. We'll talk about that in a second, because I do want to go over the 71 season, probably more in depth than most people realize. And you're going to understand why I do 71. It just jumped out at me. Listen, he's got amazing stats. I can wax poetic about his MVP seasons of 54 and 65. I can talk about his run of 40, 49, 38, 47, 52 home runs from 1961 to 65. And I can tell you all those things. The 71 jumps at me for a couple of reasons that I'll get into in a couple of minutes. I just want to introduce you to the cast of characters of that 71 season. Of course, I believe this is baseball card number 600, because I did get this in August of 1970. And of course, it's a good one. It's not a great Willie Mays card, but it certainly was better than their 71. And I wish I did print that out just for comparison. Basically, it's just a headshot of Willie Mays in 1971. And these 71 cards are bordered in black. I never got, they were okay. I guess these are romantic for me, just nostalgic and romantic for me, these 71s, because these are the first years I really started collecting. Now, on that team, and I'm going to bring these up. Yes, Bobby Bonds was on that team. Of course, his son, Barry Bonds, Willie's godson, would also play the outfield for the Giants. Ken Henderson was a switch hitting outfielder for the Giants in the early 70s. I just remember him as a kid because, remember on the back, I believe he was from Davenport, Iowa. I always thought it was kind of cool. Wow, a guy from Iowa making it to the major leagues, middle of nowhere, and playing in one of the most beautiful cities at that time, San Francisco. And of course, I want to introduce you to Chris Spire, their shortstop on the 71 team. I do believe that he finishes in the top 5 for Rookie of the Year that year. Earl Williams, of course, a local product, went to Montclair State, was the Rookie of the Year for the 71 Braves, hit 33 home runs. And then that's Tito Fuentes, who had a few years in the major leagues and then probably has one of his best seasons in 1971 for the Giants. They have him playing third. I remember him playing more second, Tito Fuentes. Fuentes hit about 271 in 71. And, of course, Charlie Fox was their manager in 71. Nothing really great or extraordinary about his managerial skills other than this. In 71, I just want to bring this up. Charlie Fox was 90 and 72, nickname of Irish. He was from New York. He went to the Bronx. He had an overall record of 377 and 371 as he managed the Giants for 5 years. And then he went to Montreal and then to Chicago. But his best success was with the Giants. Actually, I didn't know this. He actually takes over for the Giants probably in the second half of 1970. Now, I'm getting this off Baseball Reference. Great spot. And I also use Baseball Almanac. So if you're ever looking for research, go to one or both. and it'll give you some. Anyway, he does win 90 games with the Giants that year. All right, we go back to the Giants of 71. They win the division by 1 game. Here's where I want to get in. Mays is second on his team in WAR that year. Do you know that he finished with a lifetime 156 WAR, 156.1? I think only Ruth and Barry Bonds are ahead of him, which is why everyone makes the argument that Mount Rushmore should probably be at least Willie Mays and Babe Ruth. The other two we could argue about. But at least you have the two best players from the first part of the century and the second part of the 20th century. Here's the interesting thing, because I have, in my wonderful notebook, broken down the 1971 box scores of all things Mays. And I hope to illuminate the fans about what a great season he had at the age of 40. But here's the deal. I remember seeing on maybe Major League Baseball a Bob Costas interview and Mays, because I was always under this, and I've said this before on Park Ridge Sports, that the 3 most boring players were also the most consistent players, because you could pencil in every year 35, 100, 305. And we're talking about Henry Aaron. Or another guy, 24, 100, 320, and that would be, let's say, Stan Musial with, let's say, 38 doubles every year. And then Lou Gehrig, who averaged, let's say, 35, 130, and would hit 320. And you can pencil those in for 13 straight years or whatever. And they were real boring. And then I got to Mays, and I thought, Mays was really up and down. And then I saw 2 things. One is all the boldface, where he led in a plethora of categories. And not only that, but did it almost, I don't think there was a year, as I'm scanning this, during his prime where he didn't lead the league in one statistic or another. And one thing, here's the interesting thing. He never led in games played, actually, and never led in plate appearances or at bats, which I think is kind of interesting. All right. Led the league in runs scored twice, led the league in hits once, never led the league in doubles, although he hit quite a few, led the league 3 times in triples, led the league 4 times in home runs, never led the league in RBIs, led the league in stolen bases 4 times, and caught stealing twice. All right, so that's a negative, but who cares? Really, what should be prided there are the catchers who nailed him, that they could get him. All right. Never led the league in walks except for 1 year. And that's where I'm going with this. 1971, at the age of 40. We'll come back to that shortly. Led the league twice in on-base percentage, including 1971. And led the league once in batting average, 345 in 1954. I do believe that he wins. I need to see something. I'm pretty sure he wins the MVP that year. Yes, he wins the MVP twice, 1965 and 1954. And then again, he leads in kind of like the new stats. He leads in slugging 4 or 5 times. And then in new stats. And total bases, 382, 382, 360. He leads 3 times. It is interesting. There isn't a year that doesn't go by during his prime, as I'm going through this, where he doesn't lead in some category. It's amazing. You have to go to 1963, where he doesn't lead in any category. And then he goes right back to doing it. And then from 1966, doesn't lead in any category. And then 1971, he leads in walks and in on-base percentage. Now, why do I bring up the walks? Well, getting back again to the Bob Costas interview, and of course, my own kind of prejudices about consistency and Mays not really being consistent. So I've had to apologize for that. He wasn't consistent. But what he did was this. And I can't even say he wasn't consistent. I mean, actually, from 1954, as I'm looking at this, to about 1965, you could pencil him in for over 35 home runs a year, with the exception of 1960 when he had 29. But Willie Mays said in the interview, and I found this fascinating. He said, I used to take a look at the team every year and see what area of the offense I had to bump up or change. Now I'm putting those words, but these were basically what Mays was saying. So if I had to increase my power and hit more home runs, I pulled the ball. And I think that's recognizable by the fact that he goes from basically, let's say, 29 home runs in 1960, and he beefs it up to 40 and 49 over the next 2 years. He also said, maybe this team needed more speed, so I had to steal bases. Well, he went from 24 steals in 1955 to averaging probably about 32 steals over the next 4 years, of which he led the National League in steals. And then he said, and also he led the league 3 times in triples. And including that 1 year, 1957, he leads the league in stolen bases with 38 and in triples with 20. Or he said this, maybe I had to get on base more and drive up my hitting. So I would go to right field more than pull the ball. And I believe in 1954, when he comes back from service, he leads the league with a batting average of 345. And from there on up until about, I'm going to say 1963, he basically averages over 300 every year. And his home runs kind of come down a little bit and then go up as his batting average comes down. So to me, looking at it ignorantly, I'm thinking, okay, he's kind of slumping or something's happening. He's going into changing, maybe. But it was Mays accommodating himself to what the team's needs were that particular season. That's incredible baseball acumen. And of course, as you discover, Mays was basically so far advanced of all the metric geeks, me being one of them today. If you see him in old tapes in the outfield, you'll see him moving players all over the place, and they are listening to him. He was really a general on that field. I know that we love to metaphorically speak about players being generals on the field. Mays really was. He directed his teammates to better position themselves. And you can't tell me that pitchers like Marichal and Perry, who played for him, and other pitchers didn't appreciate that Mays really studied the hitters and set up the defense accordingly. And in fact, I believe there were times that Mays was even calling the game because he wanted the pitcher to throw a certain pitch in a certain spot because the defense was aligned that way in positioning so that they could be in a better situation of catching the ball or fielding the grounder. Just an incredible player that way. And for many times, I think sometimes we don't appreciate how great our great players are as students of the game. That too much, we figure, the talent just always gets them out of trouble. But no, I would say this, the Mazes, the Aarons, the DiMaggios, the Burrows, the Benches would learn the other team and learn the situations and then basically on the field manage the teams accordingly. And for Mays, I think it's part genius, baseball genius, acumen, and also part intuition, something that you just can't teach, that you are really born with. It's God-given talent. And Mays really exuded that. And what makes Mays such a great player and above all the other great players, just a charisma. That say hey moniker, his term for basically answering questions, I think it really was a term that endeared him to the press, but also really was basically himself, his positive spirit, his optimistic, his youthfulness, no matter his age, be it 20 or 40, the say hey really was an embodiment of all of his enthusiasm and spirit for the game. That when you walked away, you couldn't help but feel really good about, wow, having an interview or having Willie Mays speak to you or even being in the presence of Willie Mays. Because I think he just exuded just happiness that way on the field and off the field and in the locker room. That 71 season, though, he leads the league in walks, 112. First time he ever did it. And that's what I'm saying. Going into it, and I really do believe this, the Giants on that 71 team, well, since 62, really, the Giants were thwarted by an array of good teams, whether they were the Dodgers with Koufax and Drysdale, the Cardinals with Gibson and Brock, or even a little bit later, the Cincinnati Reds to a certain extent, well, in the 70s. But those Giant teams, because of the Dodgers and the Cardinals in the 60s also being very good, they just always seem to come up short. Yes, they do win the pennant in 62. They come up short in 63 and 64 and 65. I think they had a bad year, let's just say in 67 and 68. Mays doesn't even play that much in 68 when you consider it. Played only 148 or 67. He played 141 games, 22 and 70, 263. I think he was slightly hurt that year. But the Giants also, I'll give you what their record was. I think in 67, the Giants weren't, they were 91 and 71. They won 90 games or averaged 90 games from 63 to 68. But I do believe there was one year in there where they just had a terrible season. Anyway, you can see that the Giants were coming up short year after year. And I really believe this. Knowing Willie Mays, he's 40 years old. What makes it special that year is it's going to be his last year in as a full-time Giant, because if you recall, he's traded in May of 72. I think right around Mother's Day. And by the way, happy Mother's Day to all moms out there. The Giants always were missing. Always missing. And they were coming up short. And I really believe that in 1971, I think Willie Mays knew it was his swan song, and he wanted to go out in style. And boy, does he go out in style. As I said, he finished 24th in the MVP voting that year at the age of 40 with really very good stats, but not Willie Mays stats. He was coming off a 70 season in which he had 28 home runs, 83 RBIs, and hit 291. And then at the age of 40 in 1971, he would hit 18 homers, 61 RBIs, and hit 271. He would only play 136 games. Actually, in 1970, he played 139. It was 1969, I think he was hurt. Only played 117 games. I know the Giants had some, and I know they also had some great years, but they were always just missing. And that was all during those 60 seasons. Make a long story longer, Mays, I think, set about saying, this is my swan song. It's probably McCovey's swan song. It's probably Marichel's swan song. Let's go out. I really do believe that in his mind. He was saying that. And he said, what does this team need? This team needs someone to really get on base and pepper up the offense, etc. So what does Mays do? And this is true to Mays and the greatness of Mays. He leads the league in walks with 112. Now, why is that special? Well, first of all, it's a Billy Beane, Oakland A's, metrics, all the geeks like me. It's their dream, because not only does he get 112 walks, but he has a league-leading 425 on-base percentage. It was the first time since 1958 that he had an on-base percentage over 400. It also marked the highest on-base percentage in his career at the age of 40. And his 271 doesn't even go into factor in really his slugging prowess or what he did for the Giants in the first half of the season to really ignite the team. Make a long story short, leads the league in on-base percentage at 425. But this was my big thing: 112 walks. He was the oldest player to that time to lead the league in walks. And whose record did he break? None other than Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was 39 when he led the league in walks, breaking a record that he set himself, Ruth did, age 38, to be the oldest player to lead the league in base on balls. And here at the age of 40, Willie Mays accomplishes that. It is the first and only time he draws 100 walks in a season. He's doing it at the age of 40. Now, everybody might think that Charlie Fox inserted him into the leadoff spot. That wasn't the case. Fox had him bat for the most part, except for maybe a dozen total games based on my research, as the third hitter in the order. So basically, Mays was drawing 112 walks. And it wasn't even for McCovey so much, because McCovey was sometimes in and out of the lineup. There were many times as I was going through these statistics and the box scores where Mays was really playing first base for the entire game, and McCovey was resting his knees. And to be fair to Mays, McCovey was pretty much, I think, injured that whole year, because in 71, McCovey, he only played in 71. McCovey played only 105 games and had 18 homers and 70 RBIs. He hit 277, had a 396 on-base percentage. Good numbers, but you got to consider this. The prior 3 years, McCovey averaged about 39 home runs, 39 to 40 home runs, and drove in about 115 runs, 117 runs those 3 years, including his MVP season of 69. Now I know that he had bad knees, and he only played 105 games at first base and hit 277. So Mays felt, I guess, he had to get on base, get in front of McCovey as best he could, and also drive in runs, which he did. Here's the problem, though. He had only 61 RBIs. He had 82 runs scored that year in 71 for the Giants. Do you realize that at the age of 40, Mays had a higher WAR than the MVP that year, Joe Torre? He finished 19th in the MVP. Torre had a 5.9 WAR in 1971. Willie Stargell, of course, probably his finest season was 7.9, followed by Aaron, another 47, 118, 327. A great season by Aaron, and we've spoken about him, 7.2. And Bobby Bonds had a 6.7 that year, 33, 102, 288. Bonds was all over in the batting order that year. So here's what Mays was probably thinking. I know Bonds can take over the power department, which he did nobly. I just got to get on base. So there's someone to drive me home. I didn't figure out how many times Bonds drove him in. I'll have to do that maybe later on, but for purposes. But Mays, actually the highest WAR that year was actually Fergie Jenkins, who wins the Cy Young. He had an 11.8. But here's Mays, number 19. And his WAR was 6.3. Interestingly enough, now look, I'm not criticizing the writers here. I'm not crucifying them. But here's Willie McCovey, who actually finished higher in the MVP, despite playing fewer games in 1971 than Mays. And he only had a 2.6 WAR, as opposed to Mays. Mays more than doubled him at 6.3 for what Mays did. And here's the interesting thing, once again, about Mays in 1971. He basically played 136 games, but I was looking. He actually pinch hit 14 in 14 games. If you take those pinch hit games out, he basically plays almost the same number of games, 122, that he did his freshman year in Major League Baseball. And his stats are incredibly similar to 1951. Ready for this? Played 121 games in 1951 with 20 home runs, 68 RBIs, and 59 runs scored. Now, he does score quite a few more runs in 71. He drew 57 walks his rookie year. Basically half what he drew in 1971 as a 40-year-old. He hit 274 with a 356 on-base percentage. Mays, the vintage Mays, 271 and a 425 on-base percentage. Basically, Mays, I was looking at this. There wasn't a game that he drew 112 walks. He had a number of games where he drew 3 walks. But mostly it was this. If he didn't get on base, and this is why I'm saying he's a metrics delight that year. If he didn't get on base safely with a base hit, he was drawing walks. And I think I did it. I think there was 50 games where he doesn't get a hit. But if you have to reduce those by almost 3/4. I think there's only, let's say, 10 total games or a dozen games where Mays doesn't get on base, either with a base hit or a walk. That's incredible. And here's the deal with Mays. Ready for this? You don't think he was valuable to the lineup? With Mays in the lineup, the Giants were 76-60. Without him, they were 14-12. And higher winning percentage by 20 points. And I did this, I took out his pinch hitting appearance games because I said, well, those are games that maybe they were lost. I think there's only 3 games where he came in as a pinch hitter where the Giants were winning. And he also came in late in the year as a defensive replacement for a guy named Jimmy Rosario. But if you take out the pinch hitting games, the winning percentage goes up to 606. The Giants played .556 baseball that year and won the division by 1. And I definitely feel that if there was an MVP on that team, it really was. It really was Willie Mays. Excuse me, they won 90 games, not 91. And they won the division, .556 baseball. With Mays in the lineup, not being a pinch hitter, it was 606. With Mays in the lineup, including pitch hitting, they were 20 points higher. I think they finished at, let's say, 587 or something like that. It's incredible what Mays did. Or you take him out of lineup, whatever. He's 20 points higher winning percentage with Mays in the lineup. And that team had, like I said, a young Bobby Bonds. And as you look at it, a B-plus player. There was definitely, maybe it was pressure, definitely playing with Mays. You knew that he was always going to be compared to Mays. Bonds had some great years, though. He really did. The problem that probably hurt Bonds was playing in Candlestick and then getting traded all over the place. It's too bad Bonds doesn't get traded and then stay with another team that could have used him for quite a bit. But Bonds, at one point, he gets traded from the Giants to the Yankees, then the Yankees to the Angels, then the Angels, and I believe he goes to Texas. He goes to the White Sox. And I think he may have played for the Cubs, and then I think he goes back to San Francisco. So he was basically all – in fact, let me just get this straight. I'll get it for you right here. Bonds goes back and forth. Here's his career. He had actually a 58 WAR. He goes from San Francisco, plays for the Yankees 1 year, goes to California, goes to the White Sox, then Texas, Cleveland, St. Louis, and ends in Chicago. So basically from 1974, if you include that last season, he played for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 franchises over the next 8 years. Kind of hurts him because up to that point, he does lead the league every year, it seems, in strikeouts and by a wide margin. And with he averaged over 130 strikeouts. In fact, in 69 and 70, he had 187 and 189 strikeouts. But he does lead the league in runs. And in fact, with the Giants, this is Bonds, Bobby Bonds, he actually scored better than 110 runs or 110 runs or more in 5 consecutive seasons. Not bad. Bonds in 71, of course, like I said, 33-102. He finished 4th in the MVP, hit 288 with a 355 on-base percentage. And that's why I say Mays was amazing that year. In fact, ready for this? How did he start off the season? Charlie Fox probably may have overused him in the beginning, and then he kind of gets tired, and you can see it in just his production. But most of the Giants got tired as the season progressed. They were at one point like 20 games over 500. Let's get a great picture of Mays. You don't want to see Mays. Here's Mays. His first, the Giants race off to a 13-1 start in 1971 with Mays in the lineup in the 3rd spot. Ready for this? Mays, in his first 13 games, goes 17 for 45. He's got 10 runs, 16 RBIs. Ready for this? 3 doubles, a triple, and 5 home runs. Why do I think that Mays thought this was going to be his swan song in San Francisco? And that obviously this group of Giants, their days were numbered. And I'm talking about Marichal, Perry, because remember, Perry gets traded also for Sam McDowell. McCovey, of course, later on gets traded to the Padres. And Marichal winds up his career, I believe, with Boston. So he only had a couple more years with the Giants. So that core 4, let's just say, all Hall of Famers. And I really do believe that Mays is realizing this is it. Ready for this? Opening day hits a home run. Next game hits a home run. Next game hits a home run. Next game hits a home run. And then the next game he hits a triple and a double. So he homered in 4 consecutive games. Opening day to game 4. It ignites the Giants. They get off to a 12-1 spot. They get off to an 18-3 spot. They're 24-6, 28-8. And then Fox finally rests him when the Giants are 33-11. And he's rested. Incredible. And by the All-Star break, Mays had hit 14 home runs. And that's why I say I think he kind of wilts at the end. But at the All-Star break, ready for this? With Mays in the lineup, they're 50-32. The Giants that year at the All-Star break, I'm going to get it for you because it's easy to find. The Giants at the All-Star break, with Mays in the lineup, they're 18 games over 500. At the All-Star break, they are 55-35. So basically, they finish with 35 losses, 37 losses, 90 wins. So that's another 5. They finished 35-37 second half of the year. Mays got him off to an incredible jump. Here's the Kellogg's one again. Here's the deal, though. I was looking. Ready for this? The reason why I show George Foster, Ken Henderson with Bobby Bonds, and, of course, these 2 players, Chris Spire, who was a rookie that year, that's his 71 card, and this is Tito Fuentes, that's his 70 card, is that they were the 5 guys or 6 guys who hit in front of Mays when Mays was in the 3 spot. And I did some calculating. They get off to a hot spot also. So Mays was just driving them in. At one point, through the first 10 games, he's got 15 RBIs. Overall, those 4 or the leadoff spot in the order in the games that Mays played, they hit a combined 271. Now, that was 271. Ready for this? Fuentes that year hit 273. Henderson hit 264. Bonds hit 288. Spire hit 235. Fox inserted those 4 guys in. They kind of wilted at the end, and that does affect Mays. And you got to remember, Mays is 40 years old. But even at the end, do you realize that Fox led him off a couple of spots late in the season? And this is the beauty of Mays that year. even though his batting average does go down significantly. At one point, Mays was hitting 337 after the first 40 some odd games, hits 271, so you know that his batting average really dipped. Of course, age and just the long season and injuries and all the rest of it, and the fact that the Giants slumped. They were 35 and 37 after the All-Star break. But even the leadoff and the second spot, even they fell apart. They do average 271. Mays hits 271. Mays, if he had maybe someone else hitting with Bonds in front of him, maybe he drives in 90 RBIs. So maybe Fox, and I try not to judge Fox and all the rest of it, but maybe if he found a different person in that second or first position. Bonds may have not been a perfect leadoff guy because he never walked and he struck out a ton of times. Maybe Bonds hitting second. And through my study, I don't see Bonds hitting second at all. It would have been interesting to see what Mays could have done. As it is, in 1971, Willie Mays, at the age of 40, hits 18 homers, 61 RBIs, 271 batting average, leads the league for the first and only time in his career in walks, 112, and leads the league with his highest on-base percentage in his career of 425 to lead the San Francisco Giants to the 1971 Western Division title. Mays would end his career in a World Series. And from my studies so far, there's only 3 guys to be able to do that who ended their career and started their career in a World Series. One of them being Joe DiMaggio, the other Willie Mays, and the other by the name of Mike Andrews, who was in that 73 World Series. And we'll talk about that in future Park Ridge Sports History. Willie Mays, 90 years old this past week. This is Will OToole for Park Ridge Sports. Thank you.